Yes, welcome everyone to Celebrating Black Love. We are just giving participants a few moments of grace. Let us know where you are joining us in from, and we cannot wait to get this conversation started. Okay. We have people joining us from all around. Uh, we have Saginaw, Michigan, Dr. Sanders and Dr. Perry from Louisville, Kentucky. Michigan is in the house strong. Atlanta, Georgia. Okay. Tallahassee. Okay. This is wonderful. So we got a little bit of a national reach here. Okay, Atlanta. Okay, that's where I am, everyone. I'm residing here in Atlanta as well. Okay, FAMU representing Dr. Brittany. Oh, wonderful. I tell you, we are going to have a time this afternoon. Just so grateful that, oh, Washington, D.C. is in the house. Okay, wonderful. We are so delighted that you all are joining us this afternoon. And we're just giving people a moment of grace. It's just 2 minutes after the hour. And whenever you would like to get started, our amazing, illustrious leader of the Black Female Fatherhood Scholars Network, Dr. Lemons, you just let us know.
Okay, we can wait a couple more minutes, I think, maybe 2 more minutes. Is that
Yes,
okay?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And how many people do we have so far? I can't see.
Um, We have we have 16 people on the line. So
Okay.
this is wonderful. Right on the nose. People here on time. This is going to be a good conversation.
Yep.
Um,
And we have 77 registered. So
yes.
still waiting on quite a few more people, but we can go ahead and get started in about 2 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Awesome. We have Lansing, Michigan here as well. As you all are joining us, we'll be getting started in just a moment. You are more than welcome to share with us where you are joining in from right here in the chat, and we will be getting our conversation started momentarily. Myrtle Beach, okay. Wonderful. So grateful to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And this will be a webinar, but feel free. I guess I'll do a little housekeeping. We will have a Q&A opportunity at the end. So you are more than welcome to put your questions in the chat, or you are more than welcome during that time to unmute your microphone and ask your question directly from uh, our special guest here today. Also, too, Dr. Stewart is coming straight from class, so she says she may be a little bit behind, but that's all right. We'll get started.
Okay, Dr. Bolar, we can go ahead and start.
Okay, wonderful.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. We know you could be in a lot of other places, but we're so glad that you have chosen to join us today. And today is Black Love Day. as we know, and we are here to celebrate this day with each of you. My name is Brianna Lemons, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Baylor University. I'm also the founder and president of the Black Female Fatherhood Scholars Network. On behalf of the network, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar and invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. To learn more about the network, you can visit us at our website at www.bffsn.com. I will now turn it over to our esteemed host for today's webinar, Dr. Cassandra Bowe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lemons, and thank you so much for your leadership with the Black Female Fatherhood Scholars Network. And I just want to welcome you all here. This is not going to be too formal, but this is going to be a conversation to really get an understanding of the research behind what really drives thriving Black marriages and relationships. And so we have two amazing experts who are very well renowned for the work that they are doing in the field. And we have with us this afternoon here in Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Diane Stewart. She is also the author of Black Women, Black Love. So if you want to get your hands on that book, it is an amazing book that looks at the history of Black love and Black women's experiences with love and marriage. But she is the Samuel Candler Dobbs Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Emory University, where she created the course Black Love. So you get to hear straight from her. She earned her MDiv from Harvard Divinity School and her PhD in systematic theology from the Union Theological Seminary in New York City. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and her writing has appeared in Oprah Daily, The Washington Post, as well as other outlets. Also, as well, my esteemed colleague, Dr. Armand Perry, is joining us today as well. I've had the privilege of working with him on other fatherhood research projects, and his primary research efforts center on the interpersonal and intrapersonal and external factors that influence men's involvement in the lives of their children and families, as well as the impact of that involvement on the well-being of the family. The findings of his research have been pointed to the tools, resources, and experiences that shape men's ability to be involved fathers, the role that mothers play in facilitating and truncating fathers' involvement, and social services providers' attitudes toward engaging fathers. The findings of Dr. Perry's research have also been highlighted in the the relationship between fathers' provision of instrumental and effective support and positive outcomes from families, such as fewer behavioral problems in children and lower levels of reported maternal stress. And he also has an amazing book that looks at African American men's experiences with love and marriage as well. So we get both perspectives today, and I don't want to prolong any of our time. And so we will go ahead and dive on in to the questions for today for our panelists. And however you would like to go back and forth, you are more than welcome to do like a little popcorn with answering these questions. But I want our audience to get an understanding of what really inspired you to study Black relationships and marriage. And then after that, like, what is the conceptualization of Black love according to your perspective and research? So I'll have you start with first, what inspired you to study Black love in marriages and relationships? And, how do we conceptualize this concept of Black love?
Well, Dr. Stewart, you in the spirit of Queen Latifah, I was gonna say ladies first. Some of you all get that reference, others of you won't.
I'm not going to refuse. I'm not going to refuse. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Bowler and Dr. Lemons, for inviting us to do this have this conversation at such an important time of the year. Of course, Black love is important every day. And I always enjoy appearing with Dr. Perry. So I think my response is going to be a little bit unconventional. I am a scholar of religion and theological studies. I teach in a religion and African American studies departments. I'm joint faculty, but I am not a social scientist. I'm not even officially a historian or anything like that. Um, I got into Black Love and Marriage Studies because of a course that I designed. And I designed this course back in 2004. I was working on it in 2003, and it's just called Black Love. And as a component of the course, I wanted to look at relationships, at romantic relationships. I was a little reluctant to include it, but I did, and boy, am I so happy that I did. So I wanted to, be a scholar and do research and get a sense of what the landscape is. And as I began to comb through the sociological literature, and thank you, like big up to all you sociologists have been holding it down and doing this amazing work on Black love and family studies that a lot of us in the humanities were not even fully aware of. When I began to kind of look at all literature together, I saw the historic, structural, and systemic obstacles that have posed so many difficulties to Black love, coupling, and marriage. And I felt when I thought about that against the kinds of public conversations we were having about Black love, particularly as it pertained to Black women navigating undesired lives of being unpartnered, I felt that a voice was missing. Something was missing, and something else needed to be added to this conversation. And that's what made me decide that I need to write about this. And that's really how I got into it, really through my teaching, rather than, the standard kind of sociological research.
That is amazing. I'm glad you included Black love and relationships in your work as well. I think that, we have all benefited from your work. And I think that's what's so beautiful about, the social sciences or the study of Black love and relationships in general is that it is interdisciplinary. And I think there are so many powerful voices that can add to the conversation. And so we're delighted to have you here. Thank you yet again, Dr. Stewart.
Yeah, so I got into studying Black love because I study fathers, right? I'm a social worker by trade. I used to be a CPS worker working with families that the state of Alabama, where I'm from, said didn't have parents willing or able to take care of them. And I found that that wasn't true as often as the state said it was. And so in investigating these family situations, what I found was that there were any number of impediments and barriers, many of them manufactured and artificial, stacked up against families by some of the very institutions that were supposed to be there to serve them. And so anyway, so that led me to studying fathers. Getting into the fatherhood work, it became clear that the two primary pathways that men take in order to be actively involved in the lives of their children are either marriage or having a high quality or at least an amicable relationship with their co-parents. And so that led me to have an interest in what are men's perspectives and attitudes on marriage and romantic relationships. And so that's how I got into this work. And I'm glad that I have, because what I've learned is that that these relationships are the cornerstone of our community. And so many of the social problems that our communities face, I think, would be self-corrected at the point in time when we begin to move the needle on some of these broader issues related to whether it be marriage or romantic relationships, just working together in the spirit of cooperation as opposed to competition. So that's how I got into this work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, especially the perspective of how you found that a healthy relationship or marriage has been integral for fatherhood in the Black community as well. And I think sometimes that doesn't come into the conversation a lot of times. So it's easy to look at these things in silos, like child development over here, fatherhood over here, healthy relationships over there. And so, thank you so much for showing that systemic role that healthy relationships play in integrating fathers in the lives of their children. Thank you so much. All righty, this is going right along very smoothly. Okay, so when we say Black love, what are we really talking about?
Yes. That is such an important question. And I can tell you what I'm talking about, Dr. Bowler. I'm talking about the strength, resilience, and ingenuity that Black people have to deploy to express love, right? And to mobilize love as a pro-social force in their personal, familial, and communal lives. And I do, with the help of bell hooks, I understand love as a profound bond. It is one that defies words at times, right? But I understand it as a bond that is forged and expressed through attentiveness, care, respect, knowledge, trust, and commitment. And so on another level, I think in these, when most people are thinking about Black love or talking about Black love, I think there is an awareness that we are also acknowledging the survival and thriving of loving relationships among Black people in a world that has been designed to undermine healthy Black loving relationships. That is always part of the context, I think, when we're talking about Black love.
I appreciate that so much. It's not just the relational component, but it is also the context in which we live of oppression, and that we're thriving and loving and remaining committed in spite of this. And that has to be a part of the conversation when we speak of Black love. Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Dr. Perry.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Dr. Stewart mentioned. For me, the only thing I would add, or maybe even it's not even addition as much as it is just an extension, is that so certainly it's the case that Black folks are not a monolith, but we do tend to be a collective people, and we
Mhm.
tend to center relationships um, where we know that because we tend to center relationships, there's an other-centeredness to the way in which we engage one another. So when I think about love and the way in which I tend to conceptualize it, right, I don't think anything sort of epitomizes love more than the idea that you would give of yourself so that some other person, right, would have, and whether that be happiness or joy or whatever the case may be. So anyway, so when I think about Black love, I think about the willingness to prioritize relationship and the willingness to center others pursuant to the development of those relationships. And again, my sense and my experience tells me that those are things that are characteristic of Black love.
And I like how you talked about prioritizing it, because I feel like we're living in an age where there are so many distractions and so many demands and so many
Absolutely.
other stressors. And so it really does take a concentrated focus to say, I'm going to prioritize your well-being and this relationship above and beyond. And it makes me also think of like Dr. Eli Finkel's work with the self-expressive marriage, where to get to those pinnacles or those summits of marital happiness, it takes a lot of concentrated time, effort, as well as relationship skills. So that prioritization piece, I think, is so critical. And even just I'm a counselor on an individual basis. We want to be prioritized in the lives of the others in our treasured relationships. We want to kind of be more important than some of those other competing demands. So thank you so much, Dr.
And
Perry.
Dr. Bowler, can I just add something to
Of
that too?
course.
I think it's really important to stress what it means to give of ourselves. But sometimes what I think doesn't get stressed as much is the fact that that can be very fulfilling and rewarding for us in the process. Giving of ourselves is not always about sacrifice.
Oh
It, it,
my.
it can be, and that is a very important aspect of love. I totally agree with Dr. Perry, but it can also be a shared joy, a shared sense of reward and fulfillment that is a part of what it means to give of ourselves. And I think so many of us miss out on that because we are focused on the me and the my and the what I need, and we don't even remember that that kind of giving and that kind of sharing also rewards us. So I just
Oh,
wanted to, yeah.
I'm so happy you said that. The joy in giving, the joy in serving is not always sacrificing or sacrificial. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Um, so my next question is, that was a great segue into the next question, Dr. Stewart, which is, what is the most hopeful research evidence you've identified in your work as it relates to the well-being of Black love and marriage? So, what brings you hope
That's
from the
that's such
work
a
that you're doing?
that's such a social scientist question. Research evidence. It's so funny because my response, I'm going to give you the real kind of gut response when I think about that question. And it might seem so simple and so obvious, but this is what gives me hope. I believe, based on what I have seen and studied, that most Black people are falling in love with and or marrying other Black people. And it seems to me that they actually want that and desire that. And that gives me a lot of hope, actually. It gives me a lot of hope in a context where the messaging, and it's so funny, all of those advertisements and television commercials where we can't see like Black families or Black couples anymore. We just can't see that anymore, right? I didn't really want to take that on in my first book. It had just kind of begun, but now I am going to take it on in a book that I'm working on right now. I am going to take that on. I'm actually working on that right now. And so when the world around us doesn't even want to depict that or depict um, communion and connection among couples and families, because it has another kind of what is it, DEI agenda in the way that they interpret it, or maybe there's even a more sinister agenda and why they can't or will not depict Black families and Black couples anymore. Um, that gives me hope. As you know, even in the light of all of the public conversation about how much Black men don't want to be with Black women, no, most Black men marry Black women. You know,
That's
most
right.
Black men marry Black women, and we desire one another. We want to be with one another. We want to build lives with one another. That gives me hope.
Yes. Oh, thank you for sharing. And that imagery is so important, that it actually sometimes it seems like it's not reflected in media. What's really going on in the Black community? Yeah. Thank you for sharing. How about you, Dr. Perry?
Yeah, I would just pick up right where Dr. Stewart left off. The major finding from my own work suggests and indicates that that is indeed the case that large numbers of Black men do desire deep, intimate relationships with Black women. But to answer the question directly, you asked about sort of the evidence that points to an interest and willingness in order to be hopeful. And I'm thinking back to even when I was a doctoral student, I remember reading Herbert Gutman's The Black Family in Slavery and Freedom. And that was a piece that used analyses to point to the fact that even right out of slavery, one of, if not the first things that large numbers of Black people prioritized, right, to use that word again, was to center their families and to formalize those families through union formation and marriage. And we're talking about folks who are coming right out of the most nefarious, willful, and intentional attempt to rip and tear us apart. And as is often the case, our folks have remained resilient in the face of that. Um, we all know that the human spirit can't be broken or compromised, and there's no better example of that than the Black experience in America, I would submit to you. And so, anyway, what folks did was they sought to formalize their relationships and their families as an expression of that deep love and commitment, the way in which we have been talking. And so, if folks were able to do that under the most dire circumstances at that time, certainly it's the case that in the contemporary, save for some of the distractions and some of the media deflections that you were alluding to, that is indeed possible even now. So those are the things that, number one, have made me hopeful in the past, and those are the things that sort of keep that spirit of encouragement alive for me, even in the contemporary.
Thank you. Thank you. And on the other side of that coin is, what do you see as the biggest challenge Black couples face in contemporary society? And how do you believe couples can overcome this challenge?
Hmm. Yeah, boy, I tell you, I know you said one, but I do want to mention two. I'm not sure that I really give a lot of attention to how can we overcome. I'm going to let Dr. Perry tell us how. Um, I actually think that um, the heightened marketing of romantic love in our culture is a major barrier. I really do. I think we have an incomplete or imbalanced perception about the stages of love and love's role in shaping and preserving relationships. I really do. We are programmed, we are socialized to think almost exclusively about romantic love in its kind of early phase, the kind of infatuation, the phase of just effusive kinds of experiences of just joy and fulfillment, and love is a journey. And it's a journey over the course of a shared life. And I think our culture makes us grossly unprepared to understand that and to take that seriously. So that's one. And the other one is financial precarity. What I call inherited poverty and or wealthlessness, in my book. It is the source of so many problems in so many couples. You compound that with all of the kinds of barriers that Black people have to face to what it means to just build a healthy and satisfying life in this world. And that can undo a marriage so quickly. And so those two, now I think we need policy work, like really good policy work, and reparations, really. I know that's a grand response, but we need it. We need it. Like 10 generations of wealth was stolen from Black people. We deserve it and we need it, is what I would say. So real policies, like a government that loves Black people. That's what we need. Like a federal, a national, and local state governments that love Black people. And the only way to do that is to have a lot of Black people involved in shaping what those policies would look like. Because other people have to be taught and actually almost legislated into loving us, or, at least getting on the road to doing so. So I do think that we need like broader bureaucratic structural work to deal with the financial precarity. Honestly, on another level, I'm just thinking about those kind of strategies that Dr. Perry was talking about, those kinds of priorities. I'm a Caribbean immigrant to the United States, and in my community, a lot of African communities do that. It's practiced all over the world. We have ways of sharing resources. In Jamaica, Jamaican communities call partner. We have ways of sharing resources, and I've actually written about this. I wrote an article about this, talked about partner as a womanist institution. It's usually run by women, and I just think about the fact, like how my mother, like just financially handled all of the big moments in her life through that cooperative shared network of financial resources that she built with other women. And I know from just what others have read or written, and even friends who are African Americans who talked about their grandparents holding those rent parties just to help them pay the rent and finding other ways to galvanize resources to help them through. So what I would say is we need deeper, tighter network connections, and maybe to be thinking about ways that we can also share financial resources through our own institutions, and kinship bonds and community bonds, I should say. So there's that. And then the one about the incomplete or imbalanced perceptions about love. Um, I think therapy can help us. I think that I know that we've seen this a lot with the sports industry, that we're seeing new messaging out there that therapy is not just okay, it's good, it's needed, we deserve it. If we can continue on that path of messaging to Black people, but then also providing real access to it, whether through community therapy, ways that it can truly be accessible to all of our people, people who might be in the working classes or might even be poor, making sure that people have real pathways to therapeutic resources to help them with love, coupling, and marriage, I think would be ways to overcome it. I don't know. I don't know if I did so great on the solutions, but
Oh, I love it. I'm an advocate for all those solutions. I'm a therapist too, so I'm like, yes, therapy. And I think you brought up so many important points because I believe that the focus on romanticism or those earlier stage sets up unrealistic expectations. And it leads to a disillusionment when people actually experience what real love is, which you said it's a journey. And I feel like we as a society are not equipping people well for the journey when we just tell them how to start the ignition.
right.
I'm
Absolutely.
all for starting the ignition, but it's kind of like I want the car to be well maintained.
And
And
we
then
have
taking
some,
care of it matters.
we have some examples in our lives, in our communities, and we need more intergenerational conversations as well. Really curate these spaces for us to do that work with one another, kind of what you're doing here, and how do we kind of scale that up and make it more accessible in our wider communities?
Yes, and I feel like we could have a whole
Oh yeah.
um, talk on, the reparations piece. And because if there are financial concerns, and we see that as being such a pressing issue for a lot of couples that even leads to divorce, how can you get to those higher level needs when those basic needs are you're having difficulty there? So much that you shared. Thank you, Dr. Stewart. How about you, Dr. Perry?
Yeah, so certainly the macroeconomics is a major piece of it. I think that to not rehash anything that was already mentioned, but just sort of just to speak to something a little bit different. Um, I'm getting increasingly annoyed every time I log onto the internet and I see people arguing back and forth about what amounts to me is just foolishness. And somebody used the word distraction earlier. And people want to argue about whether or not the Cheesecake Factory is a suitable place to go on a first date. Everybody wants to talk about 50-50, if that's an appropriate arrangement for sort of division of labor along gender lines and so on and so forth. So it's like, what in the world are we doing? And I can't be convinced that, given our history, that there isn't some sort of a bot or sort of robo social media whose job it is to just insert this foolishness into a conversation and then sort of sit back and watch people get divided amongst themselves or whatever. So anyway, so that's I don't know if that's the biggest challenge, but that certainly is a challenge, I think, because increasingly in an information and technology society, that's where people are getting their information from. And so you have people who, for whatever reason, will see that and absorb it. And the more you sort of expose yourself to it, that stuff starts to seep into your consciousness. And the next thing you know, you're making decisions based on that type of ill-advised or misinformed perspective. So that just sort of, it's like a rock in my shoe, increasingly, right? So, um, and the cheesecake has really, really good bread too, but that's neither here nor
Right.
there. There's a Kroger not even a mile from my house, and I was in there like a couple weeks back and stumbled. I was looking to make French toast. I was looking for a loaf of brioche. I messed around and stumbled across the Cheesecake Factory, that brown bread. It's like, oh my goodness, this is a gold mine. But anyway, so that stuff is just, it's just a foolishness, and it's not helping at all. In terms of um, in terms of potential solutions, I somebody used the word socialization, and I think that that's where some of the antidote for this stuff is. I feel like people need real, tangible, practical examples that counter whatever these other less than helpful narratives are, right? So I spend a lot of time talking. As a matter of fact, one of my most recent studies is about the extent to which fathers are socializing their children to healthy relationships, or in some cases not, right? So what we need is, I think we need people to be socialized to what romantic relationships indeed look like, right? Not on the internet, but in real life, with all of the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs, the journey, as you may say. Even to extend the analogy with the car, you talked about the battery, and so interestingly enough, the battery only has one job, right? Which is to get the car started. Once the car is started, the battery's job is absolutely done. But if all of the other components, just as you mentioned, if all the other components of the car aren't working, the car isn't going anywhere. But the battery could be perfectly fine. So you can get the thing off to a great start. But people's lives don't mirror after school specials or Lifetime movies or whatever these things are. And so we need to see real and tangible examples of what the thing looks like so that people can make more informed decisions. And so from that perspective, I think the socialization is important. I think even what we're doing here today is an intervention of sorts, right? Just the idea that sort of traditional academics and traditional research is reserved for the walls of the ivory tower, but to take these conversations outside of the walls of the university, I think is important. Sort of making sure that we're sharing what we know with other people, so that they can then impart that on to the people that may be within their circles of influence. And for people who, for whatever reason, don't have access to this, I think we need, again, I'm a social worker by trade, right? So I think a lot about interventions. We need interventions that are aimed to help people increase their capacity by increasing their knowledge and skills by being taught, whether it be psychoeducational groups or workshops or whatever the case may be. So those are the types of things I spend my time thinking about when I'm not screaming at my phone when people are mad about the cheesecake. And
No, frivolous stuff.
fractions, yeah, fractions with how they're going to split their bills and all of this foolishness. So,
It does make you wonder, is this being socially engineered though? And it is frivolous and it's not necessarily real, and it just leads to more contention, like to conversations that really don't matter and really don't contribute to what a healthy relationship consists of. Like, I love how you said we have to socialize people for healthy relationships, because we can't assume that that socialization is happening in their lives in the traditional spaces that you would believe that people would be socialized there.
yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
every single day when I drop my son off at school, I'm asking, you got your planner, you got your books, you got your pencils, because there are no circumstances under which I would send him into the school unprepared.
Right.
And so I think similarly, it would be malpractice as a parent, right, to send him off into the world without giving him some preparation for what it is that he is likely to experience, for better, for worse, for right, or for wrong. So, yeah, I think we need to have more of those conversations, and people need to be prepared to do those and willing to have those conversations as well, right?
Yeah.
Even as uncomfortable as they may be. I think one of the challenges that some folks in our community face is that because their situations, for whatever reason, did not or have not or are not working out the way that they would like, they are reluctant to sort of reveal that to other people, sometimes even their own children. But I think we need to be open and transparent, age appropriate, of course, right? But I think we need to be transparent for all the reasons that we're mentioning, to make sure that we aren't just worried about getting the car started, right? Again, get your battery checked, absolutely. Um, but again, I mean, to take this even further, like AutoZone, they will check your battery for free, and that lets you know that that's not super important. Because if that was super important, they wouldn't be giving that away for free, right? Like they aren't going to give you a free alternator, right? They aren't going to give you a free brake inspection. They aren't going to give you free brake fluid, or right? They aren't going to give you a free transmission. Get the thing started, yes, but do your maintenance. I love that. I'll be citing you in a paper somewhere soon, making relationships analogous to a trip to AutoZone or Pep Boys or whatever.
Love it. I love it. Thank you, so much for sharing. And as you were saying about it being a part of your obligation almost as a parent to prepare them for life. And, there's a lot of research showing that parents are more so steering their kids, are encouraging, professional success, financial success, things that are all very important and critical. But the level of importance of, encouraging them to have relational success, marital success, maybe even parental success later on in their lives is waning in comparison to what they're pushing on the other end. But the research is so clear when we're looking at global happiness. Like, and then, at the end of the day, as a parent, you're like, I want my children to be happy, whole people. I want my children to be happy. And if we're really wanting our children to be happy, the research is very clear that one of the best predictors of global happiness is actually marital happiness, and or your happiness in your most treasured relationships is twofold the happiness that you get from your job or your career. And I think sometimes that is not brought into the conversation with respect to preparing children for relationships. Is actually preparing them for a good life. It's actually preparing them for happiness. And so if we got some people in the queue, if you guys are ready, we have one person in the Q&A chat, and so it shows me the order. So once we get to that portion, we will get to y'all's amazing questions. So I'm happy to see, and I see some in the chat as well. This is wonderful. Um, so I want to know, you all are doing such great work. What are your current research projects or books? Dr. Stewart, I know that you highlighted that as well. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about this new book because I read your other book cover to cover. So I'm excited to hear what's in
Thank
the
you.
works for you.
Well, I'm almost as surprised as you are because I just said, look, I'm writing this one book because I feel like this statement needs to be made. Someone needs to say this. And so since I know what needs to be said, at least in my head, I'm going to say it. I'm going to move on. As I am a scholar of religion, I do so many other things that are so academic facing, totally in a different arena, right? But then after you write the book, you have to talk about the book. And over the past 4 years, not a full 4.5, but close to 4.5 years of promoting the book, I realized I have to write another one. Because one of the things that I point out in my book, and this relates to one of the questions that's being asked about the disparity in in educational attainment between Black women and Black men, where more Black women that seem to be advancing at a higher rate than Black men in terms of attaining certain levels of education. This kind of relates to this in a way. In promoting the book, what I realized now, one of the things I emphasize in the book, and I'll probably say it again here at some point, is partnership over patriarchy. Partnership over patriarchy. I think there are a lot of things that I took up in that book that everybody in the Black community is saying, Amen, give me more. Thank you. Gosh, finally, somebody said what I was thinking. Thank you. But that thing right there, partnership over patriarchy, there might be some hesitation. What the next project that I'm working on, only because of what I've been experiencing, is going to be about the tension, what is the word that I'm looking for? The tensions, the unresolved conflicts, the difficulties that emerge in our relationships, in our family building, in our romantic relationships because of our fidelity to patriarchy. And this is where my expertise as a scholar of religion does come in, because I'm going to spend a whole lot of time on what we call in biblical studies, in religious studies, the household codes, all those Pauline scriptures that everybody thinks they know how to interpret, that thinks that it means wives be submissive to your husband and all of that. And he's the head and all of those things I'm going to take on in this book. I'm going to take them all on in this book. I'm really dealing with the issue of gender, gender roles, patriarchy. I mean, what I called for in the first book was flexibility. Flexibility and not fixing our identities based on whether or not we are female apparent or identified or male apparent or identified, but based on people's talents, based on what a couple can do together, based on when we put these requirements on ourselves. As a man, you must do this. As a woman, you must do this. And we can't uphold those requirements in our marriages. What is that doing to the quality of our marriages? Even if a lot of Black marriages have to be egalitarian, I have gotten the impression in promoting this book, I've gotten the impression that most people don't want that. Even if they have to come to that, that now there's this whole concept of Black women going for the soft life. He's got to, provide for me and do this, this, and that. Now that's the and then people always want to take it to the other direction. Oh, she's letting Black men off the hook. She's saying they don't have to do anything. No, partnership over patriarchy, as a couple, as a family, as adults responsible for this household. That's a word I really don't like. How about responsible for this home? How is it that we're going to work together to do that? And why is it that gender must play such an important role? Well, I'll tell you why, and I'm going to argue this in the book. I think Black people know what the Afro-pessimists have been saying for, the last 30 years is really true. Our race will never qualify us for citizenship in this country, will never qualify us for all of the benefits of the liberal human subject that whites have been able to have and other non-Blacks have been able to have. But I believe that we have somehow been socialized to feel that our gender will. And if we can just hold tight to those Eurocentric gender norms that were inculcated in freed persons after slavery through missionary societies, through the Freedmen's Bureau, through the institutionalization of these kinds of kind of traditional patriarchal religious Christian perspectives in our Black schools and institutions, in our churches, it was everywhere. I think that we really, really believe that if we can just hold on to that, that is something that can make us human. That is something that can be recognized to qualify us for real citizenship. We have to disabuse ourselves of that kind of rigidity. And so let me be clear, Dr. Bowler. I'm not interested in prescribing anything for any particular family, right? Someone can decide to have what looks like a traditional household, a woman in the household or in the home might decide, I want to have a couple kids and I want to stay home with them, and they've figured out a way to do that. Great, wonderful, celebrate. It's not about what people do. It's about affixing people to roles as their natural duty, as their natural role. It's about a rigid connection of people with certain roles because of their gender that I'm really saying we have to loosen up on this and become comfortable with the fluidity. I grew up in a household where my father did everything a traditional mother does and everything a traditional father does. My mother worked a lot outside of the home, and my father felt like no less of a man doing it. And I felt his love and nurturance all around me because he played those roles, because he did those things. And so I am saying this as a person who's lived it, who's seen it, and has seen it work for a husband and a wife and a family. Yeah, I can get too passionate about this, but we need major conversations about this because what is being proposed as the model in a lot of these conversations that Dr. Perry was talking about is this traditional patriarch who is, I'm talking as a woman, my head, my leader, I truly don't even understand what that's about. But that's what we're talking about. And he's also supposed to be a high value man, which is associated with a certain kind of capitalist attainment. So, yeah. So I would really like to see our communities choose partnership over patriarchy and to just give ourselves permission to be free and fluid and flexible and to know that as adult human beings what we are doing is caring for ourselves and the people we love, and we can do that by playing multiple roles regardless of our gender. That's what this book is going to be about.
Oh,
And
this
I'm
is
going to deal with
amazing.
all the biblical passages. The Genesis story that everybody, just thinks they know what happened. There are two creation stories, by the way, in the Bible, and they were written at vastly different times. But anyway, so I'm going to take all of that on and really try to work through that with my audiences.
So powerful. I want to take some of your courses. But that piece of partnership over patriarchy and leaning into your strengths. Because when you're leaning into your strengths, like there's a joy that comes from that instead of trying to write with your non dominant hand. Like, what is your dominant hand? What are your dominant strengths that you bring to this relationship? And how can we? As a couple, capitalize on those. And it makes me also think about what we're seeing a lot of times with the literature on African American fathers is that they are more highly engaged in those nurturing traditional activities within the home, and how that bodes well for the children and for anybody listening. It actually bodes well for your sex life too. Oh yeah, we see that the more men are engaged in, like, housework and house, that actually bodes well for the sex life too. So just a little nugget for you as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. Dr. Perry, what are you working on? What are some of the new things that you are working on?
Yeah, well, the first thing I was going to say is that was one that I forgot. The high value man is one that also put that on the dartboard and started throwing stuff at it too, right next to the Cheesecake Factory criticism. Um, what am I working on? The project that my team and I most recently wrapped up was it was a healthy relationship and sexual health intervention for 16 to 24-year-olds. So just to give you a little bit of a chronology, so from 2015 to 2020, we had um, a fatherhood project where we were teaching parent education to non-resident dads. One of the findings from that was that because the money was earmarked for fatherhood, we couldn't spend any money to serve mothers. So that got in the way of the co-parenting piece, right? Because again, these were non-resident dads, and the dads couldn't apply what they were learning because they had to negotiate access to their kids from a person who had not been involved in the intervention. So then we got some funding and we developed a co-parenting intervention where what we did was we taught the mothers the same thing, the trimmed down version of what we were teaching the dads. And the idea there was to try to manufacture some receptivity to the idea of co-parenting right at around the same time that the dads were graduating from the fatherhood program, So we sort of pique mom's interest in being more willing and receptive to talk about co-parenting. And then we can tell dad, okay, now here's your chance, show up as your new and improved self, right? Based on whatever they had learned in the intervention. The challenge then was that many of our, on average, our dads were about 34 and the moms were about 32 years old and the kids were between 7 and 9 years old. So for many of them, they had been at odds for close to a decade. And so we were having to work through some of that sort of relational scar tissue, if it will, in order to get back to an even sort of a footing. And so the natural progression was to continue to swim further upstream and just start doing some primary prevention work, working with younger people to try to equip them with the knowledge and the skills to be able to identify the distinction between a healthy versus an unhealthy relationship so that they can make, again, more informed decisions. Just like Dr. Stewart was saying, not trying to prescribe the decisions to them, but to help them be better equipped to make their own decisions and have those decisions be grounded in solid information rather than wherever it is that young people stereotypically get their information from. So, so that's what we've been working on. The data analysis is currently, the intervention is complete. We're now just working on the analysis and seeing some early returns related to some of the things that I've already been talking about, these notions around socialization and how important that is for parents, um, and also sexual discipline is another thing. These are real conversations that I think we need to have because again, as many of us know, getting involved in romantic relationships, there's some trial and error, right? Like you don't always know what you like or what you want or what you would find desirable in a partner until you've had a couple of experiences, and then you say, well, I might not go that direction again, but there's some things and some traits and qualities here and there, so on. Okay, so that becomes much more difficult if and when children are involved, because the romantic relationship may dissolve, but you indeed are tied to that person into perpetuity, right? And so something else that I think we need to involve and engage discussions, conversations are about making sure that that we aren't doing that. Because again, what happens is, in too many instances, I think those situations where there is a less than amicable relationship between dads and moms, the children see that and they become the collateral damage. And that less than amicable relationship, that becomes the socialization that the children get. And that doesn't bode well for being able to identify solid relationships and moving forward in a fruitful sort of a way. So just trying to work to counteract some of the things that we're seeing that may be all too prevalent in the contemporary, so that folks have some counter narrative that they can use to balance some of these things out, is what we've been working on.
Thank you both so much. And so what we'll do is we'll do one more question from our created list, and then we already have the chat buzzing with some questions. So I definitely want to honor all of our participants' questions as well. So the last question before we go into participants' questions, and then we'll kind of follow up with where to follow you all, parting messages as well, is what is one myth that you want to debunk about Black love and marriages?
Mhm. Wow, one myth. I think it might be tied to one of the things I love that I think is undersold, it's underappreciated. It's that Black men don't like or love Black women. I think that that is a growing myth, especially because of the divestment movement and enthusiasts for the divestment movement. And honestly, increasingly now that Black women don't like or love Black men. I think that 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 is a critical one. And I think it's going to become even more and more critical as social media continues, not just social media, public culture continues to guide so many people in what they think about the opposite sex in our community. Yeah, so I think that's one. We do have some problems, and I do think that some of the kind of influence that those kinds of public media, social media conversations, reality TV have upon us is beginning to build deeper levels of distrust amongst us. And that scares me. But I do think it is a myth that Black men don't like or love Black women. And I think it's a dangerous one. So that's one I would want to debunk.
Thank you so much for sharing because it's not the truth based on what we just shared earlier. Black men are typically partnering with other Black women and vice but that's what we typically see. And so I'm grateful that you shared that. How about you, Dr. Perry?
Yeah, so for me, I don't know if this is a myth as much as it is just a sort of a statement that I wanted to make, which is that any critique of Black families or Black love necessarily needs to be accompanied by a critique of the larger and broader society in which those Black families operate. So, so anyway, so just saying that to say that anytime I hear anyone pointing the finger saying, well, these are some challenges or these are some of the things that are wrong with Black families, I make it my business to say, well, it's also the case that these families are operating within a broader context that is certainly not benign, but is indeed hostile, and is willfully and intentionally hostile. So we cannot forget that. Uh, and also just pointing out the fact that what is it about um, the prospects for Black love that so threatens our oppressor that they spend so much time, effort, and energy trying to dismantle it, right?
Powerful.
Um, and so yeah, I like that. I think if that's the last sort of structured question, that's what I would want to sort of impress upon people.
You. Thank you so much for sharing. And so at this time, we will open up an opportunity for our participants to ask questions. You are more than welcome to unmute your microphone. We would love to see your face, if possible, as well as you ask your questions. It's not every day you get a wonderful opportunity to sit and chat with experts in the field. So um, I I believe here, Kayla, you had a wonderful question about the socialization of children and how parents are prioritizing financial and professional success. And so her question was, how do you propose parents break this cycle? She received a lot of those messages growing up, not to date until after college or not have children until, you're a certain age. Like, how do we break this cycle of prioritizing financial and career success over relational success as parents?
I don't know that it doesn't have to be either or, I don't think. Right. Yeah. So the idea of not dating until after college, that so let me also say this too, right? Like I'm a social worker, so I'm a true believer in self-determination, right? So if I think that people should be in a position to make the decisions about how it is that their life turns out. So I'm the last thing I would do is say that somebody's decision is wrong. I Not dating until after college, that seems um, uh, that seems less than realistic in my estimation. Again, it's just right. and I'm also curious, like for what purpose? And it sounds like from the question is the idea is to prioritize education and then maybe occupational and later on financial success. But you aren't spending every single moment of the day, and if you are, that strikes me as unhealthy as well. Right. So some of this is about balance, right? Now I do think it's important for people to not get so head over heels that they aren't focusing on taking care of their business, right? But certainly we can do both, I think. And even within the context of this idea of building one's sort of occupational resume and starting to create some wealth or whatever the case may be, I I'm a hip hop head, right? So I often turn to hip hop to sort of explain things. And there's a song that says, "What's better than one billionaire? Two," right? Especially if they're the same hue as you, as I think is the second line, right? So again, so that speaks to the idea of partnership. And imagine being able to build that financial success or occupational success with a partner who you know is in your corner and is willing to not only sacrifice of themselves so that you can benefit, but also, as you all have astutely mentioned, they receive uh, pleasure out of being able to give to and provide for and support, right? So yeah. So again, so a short way of saying, I don't think we have to pick. We can. It doesn't have to be either or, but can certainly be a both and, I think. Yeah.
You know, can I
Mm.
just say what I would add to that is what I want to be able to do is to encourage a culture of reading in our community. I mean, there were like I think 5% of African descendants could read coming out of slavery. There were African literary societies all over the place. Like folk just couldn't wait to come and read. And it's almost like now we're taking it for granted. We don't have to run to the internet for answers either. There's good literature out there, good materials for people who really want to begin to think about how to choose partnership over patriarchy. I always recommend Bell Hooks's book, The Will to Change. And I tell you, people might say, oh, it's a Black feminist. She's saying the same old thing. I teach that book in my Black Love course, and I'm always amazed at how hard she actually comes down on Black mothers and Black women, including herself. She uses herself as an example. We say we want to see the full range of Black men expressing their emotions and being vulnerable. And she gave the example of she was in this relationship, and when her partner began to do that, she was like, oh, what's this? Her whole thing is we all need a re-socialization and a programming, so to speak, or a reorientation to love and relationships. But I think overall, I think in some upper class Black communities, there is more of an attention to this. There is more of an attention to what it means to cultivate friendships and relationships and networks among adolescents so that they begin to think about whom they might want to pick to begin to date and to develop options for life partnership with. I think that we need to make those kinds of institutions. Now, I'm not saying that we need to have everybody in the Black community doing cotillions, but because I've been to one. Um, some of my baby cousins were just in one the other day, and I said to my cousin, "God, I'm doing cotillions. Lord, you better balance that out with some African stuff, please balance that out." So I'm not promoting that per se, but what would it mean for us to give more concentrated attention to the fact that we have to think about helping our young people, our adolescents, to consider what it means to begin to build toward life partnership. Um, and we have to do that in a more deliberate way. I think that we're just not deliberate about it. And our parents fear pregnancy. When I read hers, I'm like, oh my God, that sounds just like my parents. I was just like, are you Caribbean? I just that sounds just like my parents, just like my parents. I was at a dinner once at my parents' house. They entertained a lot, and one of our family friends, the daughter, had asked, "How old were you when your parents let you date, Diana?" I was like, "I still can't date," you know. And I was like in my late 30s. They never gave me, and I had been married at that point, maybe even twice by then. I said, "I still can't date." They still haven't given me permission to date. Um, I I like the question because I do think we need to be more thoughtful about it. And as Dr. Perry said, and to create a life of balance, but that means not out of fear of pregnancy or fear of just ignoring it or pushing it off or saying it doesn't matter, it's not important, but to really try to find ways to build in um healthy engagement and interaction among our children. And of course, I'm talking all of this in a kind of heteronormative context. I mean, I'm sure that, there are other ways we could even have this conversation if we're talking about all kinds of sexualities. But yeah, that's what I would say. How do we bring awareness really to Black parents that thinking about how the next generation will build has to be a part of the way we rear and socialize our children as well in age appropriate ways. We might need the therapist to help us with some of that. We might need it, but it's really about bringing it to the attention of what it means to parent, which I think the person who raised the question raise something important. I think it's either we have a laissez-faire, hands-off attitude, I don't get involved in my children's dating or anything like that, or yes, delay it, delay it, delay it. And those two are not the answer, I don't think.
If I can jump back in, I just thought about something too as I was listening. This was maybe several years ago, 10, maybe 15 years ago, where I'm sitting in a restaurant with my wife and my own mother, who was visiting from Alabama, where I'm from, and we're sitting in not the Cheesecake Factory, but another restaurant called Cheddar's that has a really, really good apple pie. But we're sitting there, and in the booth right next to us was a group of adults, and it was a mix of men and women. And then in the booth across from the booth behind us was a group of teenagers. They looked maybe 14, 15, probably not old enough to drive, but like they weren't like small kids either. And my mother was eavesdropping or ear hustling is what we know it as. My mother's ear hustling and reveals to us that what's happening is the people sitting in the booth next to us were the parents of the children are sitting across from them. And the children were there on what was sort of tantamount to a group date. It was like maybe 6 or 7 kids, and it was a mix of boys and girls or whatever the case may be, and they were sort of coupled up in the booth. And once we heard her sharing with us, you could look over and you could see, oh, okay, that looks like what it is that she described it. And again, their parents were there, and it was maybe 6 parents, like 3 moms, 3 dads, or whatever the case may be. So then we get into this conversation, and we were just sort of having a chuckle about the fact that no such thing would have ever happened when we were young, because my mother, who was sitting right there, would not have, not only would she not have sanctioned such a thing, but she absolutely would have not have actively participated in it, right? Um, and like we had a laugh about it or whatever, whatever. And it was only like maybe 3 or 4 days, even after my mother had left and gone back home, I was like, you know what, like that, I don't think that was the worst thing in the world. Because again, it was no different than the idea of me sending my kid to school and checking his backpack to make sure he has a pencil. Because nothing bad was going to happen to those kids sitting right there 5 feet away from their parents. But what they were getting was an opportunity to engage people and get some sense for what they either did or didn't like, what would or would not be acceptable to them. And they were doing it under the tutelage of their parents who could guide and direct them, which to my way of thinking, like that's literally the job. And the other thing about this is my mother never gave me permission to date either. But that didn't stop me. And what's dangerous about that is that there were points in my life where, absent information from solid and reputable sources, like I would have turned to Luther Campbell or Todd Shaw, Uncle Luke and Too Short, right, to get sex education, which is absurd. And we know the results of that sort of thing, right? So yeah, so I'm seeing someone talk about the idea of normalizing what is like just natural, right? Like, so anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Dr.
So great.
Perry. And we're on the topic of Black love, and but this question is kind of on belonging. And what about interracial couples as well, and their children finding a place and a sense of belonging, in when there's always these contrasts between Black versus white. Where do multiracial children find their place?
This is interesting. So I've been Black for as long as I can remember, right? So I can only speak from that. I can only speak definitively from that perspective. In all of my experiences, uh, children who are biracial, I've I'm not accustomed to seeing those folks be marginalized, right? Again, black folks will embrace anyone who they see as for them, right? Again, at least in my experience, right? One of the other sort of conversations that we see on social media has to do with the extent to which people's exhibition or demonstration of behavior will or won't allow them entree into the cookout, right? Right. And so what's happening in those conversations, at least the way that I understand it, is whether or not these people are engaged in the types of behaviors or espouse an ideology that is cool with Black folks. And if the answer to that question is yes, then we tend to open our arms and say, hey, we're going to embrace you. Right. And my sense is it would be no different for biracial children. Again, at least in my experience. If we're keeping it 100 though, right, as the young people say, the thing that I see more often is, um, and this disturbs me when I see people who are biracial seemingly twisting themselves into pretzels to do everything except acknowledge and recognize the part of them that is Black, right? The I'm a football degenerate. The University of Notre Dame just played for the national championship, and their coach is biracial. And so these questions popped up about, oh, well, coach, I forget his last name, Freeman, I think. What are your thoughts about being the first Black head coach to play for the national championship? And his immediate response was, my mother's Korean. Well, nobody's asking you to downplay your mother's heritage. That wasn't the question, though, right? Why are you working so hard to not acknowledge the part of you that's Black? And again, I don't know Marcus Freeman, so if Marcus Freeman sees this and I'm wrong, then you can give me a call or email me or whatever the case may be. But my sense is, if the reporter would have asked Coach Freeman, hey, Coach Freeman, how does it feel to be the first Korean American coach to have an opportunity to play for the national championship? I'd bet an amount of money that matters to me that his response would not have been, oh, wait, my dad is Black. You see what I'm saying? And
Yes.
so like, that's where, for me, I don't know. I'd rather talk about the Cheesecake Factory than see people do that.
Mm.
That just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
don't even know if that's a response to the question or not. But what I'm trying to say is, from my perspective, biracial children who are the product of an interracial relationship, all of my experience with them suggests that with and among Black people, if they exhibit or demonstrate that they care for and care about Black people, those folks are embraced with open arms.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
I'll just say briefly, I always teach, when I teach on Black families in the Black Love course, I always teach, some material on mixed race families or multiracial families. And I've seen very interesting kinds of, like reflections from, there's a book where I teach perspectives on fathers of mixed race, Black fathers of mixed race children, right? Or that, the father is Black and the mother is something else. Usually in most of these cases, they were white. And one of the things that I do perceive is that there can be a real concern on the part of the Black parent, especially. I think increasingly some white parents, some are also showing concern for this to make sure that the child is connected to their Black culture. And how do I do this? In kind of in response to what Dr. Perry was just saying, in a culture that rewards them for associating with and affiliating with anything that's not Black. And so what I do read about in the literature that I've seen is the difficulty and the struggle, but the commitment to doing so on the part of some Black parents. I've definitely read about that, but that it has to be deliberate. So I think the questioner's point about, is it always a question of do we belong? I think we live in a society where if there is no deliberate attention to that, um, that is going to be a perennial question, for people who are multiracial or mixed race. If there is no deliberate, especially if they're not being raised in Black neighborhoods, if they're not being raised in Black neighborhoods, especially, there has to be a deliberate attention to how do we make sure our children belong or our child belongs. How do we do that? So I think you really have to very determined and I think very self-conscious and deliberate parenting that is doing everything possible to make sure that that child is located in and connected to that Black culture or whatever culture, even the other cultures or another culture that represents their heritage. Because America wants you to choose between being Black and white. That's what America does. Those are the options. And I do, of course, this can get us into the colorism conversation. It's funny as I listen to Dr. Perry, that was my upbringing. Like there were a few mixed race kids in my neighborhood, and we just all were Black. So I mean, we were just all Black. It didn't matter what they looked like, they were Black. That literally was my upbringing. And so when I started teaching, when I got out and was starting to teach in the late 1990s, that's when the whole thing of mixed race, multiracial, began to emerge. It was just like, yeah, y'all Black. I mean, the world sees you as Black. You got more than a drop, or you got a drop, and you're Black, and your culture is Black because you're being raised in this Black neighborhood with us. But I personally have definitely seen a shift and seen a shift in even my own students now where it's important for them to have connections to both heritages or the primary heritages. And I think that can happen. I'm thinking about a student that I'm engaged with now whose mother is Black and her father's South Asian, and she's deeply connected to both of her cultures and both of her heritages. I think she primarily, kind of locates herself as Black, but deeply connected. But it really does mean deliberate effort on the part of the parents to help that child have connections to those cultures so that they do feel a sense of belonging in this culture. Black or you're either white. In this, it's just if there's no deliberate attention, the default will be absolutely you'll be asking, where do we belong? Where do we belong in a lot of cases?
Yes. Thank you so much Dr. Stewart. We'll have one more question. This is going to be from Dr. Lewis, and then we will have our concluding remarks from our guests.
Yes, thank you so much for this webinar. It's very rarely that you receive a sermon and Jay-Z lyrics all in one webinar, so thank you. Okay, I have a question about co-parenting relationships and wondered if there were any attributes or characteristics from Black love that could be utilized in a co-parenting relationship, specifically one that no longer has a intimate relationship.
Can I'll just say one thing. I want Dr. Perry to answer this because this is really his domain. But I'll say one thing. One of the things I tried to point out in my first book, Black Women, Black Love, America's War on African American Marriage, was that whatever attributes or whatever affective technologies we deploy when we're loving our friends, our siblings, our children, and our family members, our neighbors, whatever, those are exactly the same that we need in romantic relationships. They don't change. They don't change. Love, how we love in other relationships, which seems to become so difficult sometimes when we bring it over to the issue of romance. We need those same characteristics. We need kindness. We need concern. We need care. We need regard. We need a respect for the dignity of that person. We need a kind of what do I want to say it like, not the codependence, but a kind of what is the word? Oh gosh, it's escaping me, but we're reciprocity. That's a word. We need reciprocity, all of those things. I just want to say that because when we remain focused on that, even after the dissolution of the romantic kind of involvement with a partner, those are the qualities, those are the affective technologies that get us through, working through whatever we need to work through for the good of the child. If that makes sense. I don't know, but I just felt the need to say that as part of an answer that we have to remember that the how we love when we're loving our parents, when we're loving that's the foundation of what's built even in romantic love. And I think couples, even if their relationship ends in dissolution, have to remember that. If you can love one person, James Baldwin says, you can love any person. And so if you can love your mama, if you can love the child, you can still have a regard for the other parent with whom you made this child. Part of loving in that kind of situation is acknowledging that the health, safety, the wellness, the thriving of this child is something that you can both be committed to. And I think Black people have had to do that in our culture, even other mothers, right? Like mothering other people's children, that I think we do have that in our DNA of love, in a certain way. So, okay, I'll be quiet. This is really Dr. Perry's question, I think.
So if you will, Dr. Lewis, share me the question again so I can make sure I'm responding directly to what it is you're asking. I know it's focused on co-parenting, but
Yeah.
I missed the first part of
I
it.
was just thinking of the attributes of Black love that could be promoted in co-parenting relationships. So especially those who are no longer in romantic relationships.
So how do we take some of the attributes from a romantic relationship and superimpose them into a co-parenting relationship, whether the romantic piece is intact or not?
Or especially when the romantic piece is not intact, because it feels like there's some attributes of Black love that can be used, especially for co-parents who are no longer together or in a romantic relationship, but still need to partner for the success or the healthy development of the child.
Right. So here's where I think so the thing that comes to my mind is just investment. And so I think about investment when I think about marriage, and I think about investment when I think about children. We know that, and I'm not talking about a financial investment, but I'm not excluding a financial investment either. But um, the one of the largest predictors of later father involvement is earlier father involvement, right? And so essentially what's happening is we're talking about investment. So we're talking about a situational scenario where a man is invested in the healthy growth and development of his child. And when that is in place, independent of what either has or hasn't happened with the co-parent, that investment is still there, right? So I think that I think the same things. I think that so I was talking about sexual discipline earlier. So for me, increasingly, um, so-called responsible fatherhood is no fatherhood or on time fatherhood. Right. So when I talk to young men in and around the community, I tell them the same things I'll tell my own son. Just because somebody is willing to have sex with you, that doesn't mean that you're under some obligation to oblige, right? Like you actually have the capacity and the agency to turn it down. And if you do that, then you don't have to concern yourself with the consequences of sex before you're prepared and ready to deal with them. So if that's the case, I think people, because it's also true that we talk about distraction. Sex is and can be a distraction, right? And sex for a lot of people in terms of their relationship, it's like a cologne or a perfume or deodorant. Like it covers up a whole bunch of funky stuff in the relationship. Because that's the thing that binds the people. The sex is good, but everything else is a mess. They got a good battery, right? But the rest of the car is not. So, so if people were taking more time to again develop the foundation of their relationship, get to know one another, I think you can create an opportunity to have a deeper connection and investment that would be much more likely to stand the test of time, even if and when the relationship dissolves. I think. So yeah, I think that's the response. And I think the same thing with the romantic relationship that might evolve into a marriage. And I think the same thing is true for the co-parenting. Because if you got a deep investment in your child, it's much less likely that you will become disengaged even after the romantic relationship is no longer the case. But because for too many people that isn't the case, there are large numbers of men who are unable or unwilling to untangle their roles as a husband or boyfriend or romantic partner from their role as a father. And that's troublesome and problematic. And to my way of thinking, is the largest domestic problem our community faces, I think.
Wow. Wow. This has been just such a phenomenal webinar. I feel like we touched on so many topics from, co-parenting, socialization of children, Black love, what does it constitute, gender roles. This was very full, very dense plate. And I'm glad that we are recording this so that people can come back to this conversation. But, how can people follow you and this great work that you're doing so that we can stay connected to you and your work?
Yes. For me, the best way would be my personal website, www.dianemstewart.com. And Diane has two N's in it. I'm going to even put it in here. Stewart. I'm also on LinkedIn, IG, Facebook, Diane M. Stewart, PhD. Diane has two N's. So Diane, Dianne, M. Stewart, PhD on IG and Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Diane M. Stewart. You can find me there too. Those would be the ways, the best ways, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, probably the best way to get a hold of me is, I guess probably on my Facebook. I'm more active on that than anything else. I got rid of Twitter, whatever they're calling it now. I don't fool with that anymore. And Instagram, that's just pictures of me goofing around at football games. So if you're looking for something substantive, Facebook is probably the best way to get a hold of me. Or just to shoot me an email, Armon, ARMON.Perry, PERRY @Louisville.edu. And in whatever ways I can keep the conversation going with you all in whatever corners of the world you're doing this work, I'd be glad to do it.
Mhm, mhm.
We are so incredibly grateful for you all joining us for this conversation. It was so powerful, so enlightening and enriching, uplifting. And we will definitely stay connected with you all. They are also going to be contributing to the network's upcoming book on Black love within a strengths-based context as well. So we are grateful that they are going to be contributing their genius to some of the works that we will be putting out as well. And we are so grateful for your time and we appreciate you all. Onward and upward. Take care.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.